So, have you ever had a dream, a vision, a mission, in which you could use all of your talents, capabilities, and intelligence to help people? If so, you must pick up and read this book called The Yes Effect. This is a book that gives testimonies of people who wanted to listen to that voice inside, that voice of God, to use their talents, gifts, and abilities to help many people. This produced an impact not only in the lives of people, but in communities, cities, and even countries. Today we begin a series, which we're going to call The Yes Effect, Stories that Transform Lives. The author of this book is Luis Bush. Who is he? Luis Bush is an economist who studied at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's also a theologian from Dallas Theological Seminary, and he has a doctorate from Fuller in Culture. He's a man who has witnessed tremendously interesting stories of people who use their abilities, their gifts, their capabilities to help people in different countries all over the world. The Yes Effect, stories that transform lives. Luis, thank you for being here with us. Many thanks to you, Agustin. What this book communicates is interesting, and the first question that comes to my mind is, why did you name the book The Yes Effect? Well, we've seen throughout our pilgrimage on the earth these last few years that there are people who have a real encounter with God. And in that encounter, a new dimension of perspective comes, and they begin to walk with a faith that responds to the challenges that they face. And the Yes Effect is the story of the people we've met. They're friends from over many years of pilgrimage that have said yes to God, and the result in their own lives that have been transformed, and also in the communities where they live, work, and serve. Because this is a book that communicates that people, not necessarily educated people that went to a university or highly prepared people, but simply people who said, okay, this matters to me, or I can't be indifferent to the tragedy I see here before me. I have to do something with my abilities and help these people. Is that right? That's exactly right. So these are cases of people who have different types of qualifications, experiences, and preparation. But they're people who have been sensitive to the realities around them. And they've responded to many different cases and situations that are difficult, complicated, and disastrous in some cases. But they've seen that they're able to do something, and they've taken that first step. So the story is the result of those continuing steps that have seen transformation in the communities and the cultures of their lives. Let's start with the first story, Luis. This draws my attention. It's in Egypt, with Father Saman and Garbage City. Tell us a little about that story, because how does this man begin with a call and hearing this voice to help people in extreme poverty? How does that story begin? Well, it starts with a yes. He says yes when he receives a repeated invitation from a person who lives in Garbage City. He was a garbage collector. Father Saman talks to a garbage collector. Yes, he's a garbage collector. His name is Kidis, which is a name that means holy, but he wasn't very holy at that time. He was coming with his little cart to collect garbage from the street where Saman lived. Every day he passed by there. So Saman notices that, and he sees this man one day, and he thinks about going to talk with him. So he talks with Kidis, and they begin a relationship that grows quite close over the months. Now this man, Father Saman, is a Coptic Christian. What is a Coptic Christian? Well, the Copts are from the Coptic Church, which in the first century, with Mark, one of the disciples, he arrives there and He's the first pope. They called him Pope. So Coptic is a system very similar to the Gospel and also to the Catholic Church in some senses, with its own doctrine, which is quite emphasized. According to what I understand, Father Simon begins to preach the Gospel to this garbage collector. After a while, seeing him outside his house, he goes out and talks to him and begins to share, yes, the Gospel. And this man extends an invitation for him to get to know the place where he lives, called Garbage City. What is Garbage City? Well, it's a place called Makatam. That's located southeast of the city of Cairo. So, in Garbage City is where they have all the garbage from the whole city, where the collectors take it and it accumulates. And one day Kiris comes with a very heavy burden because there are drug addicts, people who are really lost in all senses, and he feels for his people. And after he responds to the call and knows God personally, he says, I want to share what I've received with my people, but I don't know how to do it. Come and help me. So he invites Simon. 2 questions. I understand that the first contact is with this trash collector. And the first question that I have is, if I have to communicate the Christian message to someone, would I talk to a trash collector? What motivates Father Simon to talk to this garbage collector? And second, what I also understand is that this garbage collector invites Simon, and he didn't think it was a good idea. Father Simon didn't want to go and do an evangelization work in that place. It's very true. In the first case, he saw his garbage being picked up every day and begins to recognize Kiris, the same person every day. So one day he talks to him, and they begin to have a relationship. He goes out when Kiris comes to collect the trash. And one day, he invites him into his own house. And it's in that moment when he feels the call to invite Kiris to know God in a personal way. There is then the first presentation of the message. And there, Kiris, after some time, I believe, it wasn't immediate, but he reflects, and he accepts Jesus as his own personal Savior. And then he returns and sees the need of all the people there. Alcoholics, also drug addicts, and people who were really lost. There were also many pigs everywhere, garbage and terrible things. And he says, come and help us. So that starts the second stage of what's happened with Simon. First, talking to him and delivering the message, and second, the invitation that follows. What do I do now with this invitation to go and help? Does he resist? He resists quite a bit, and he continues to resist. He doesn't want to go, because he feels he has a pretty good idea of what's there, what the place is like, without having ever gone there. So he resists day after day. But Kiris insists, and he continues to say every time he sees Father Simon, come and help us, we have a very difficult situation. That happens to us in life, that many people, God is inviting us to do something that breaks all of our framework, even our comfort and formative aspects of our life. It breaks our structures, and we have to actually do what this book says, the yes effect, and obey that call. For that reason, since his story is one of resistance, how does he finally overcome that resistance? How does he surrender to the fact that he can't resist any longer? Yes, we have many excuses, right? In this case, he could have excused himself because he only has one good eye. So he has many reasons to excuse himself and not go. But what happens is, one day he says, this isn't the call of a man. This really is a call from God to go to this place and see what I can do. I believe that there's nothing I can do, but I'm going to at least see what's going on. So that was the beginning, the first step in his mind to go to that place. He dared to accept the invitation, even though he didn't feel very convinced. He wasn't quite convinced. The first time that he goes there, finally, he's on a double-decker bus, like those in England, where they have tall buses where people sit upstairs and at the front. So there he is, and he's going to the place. So that bus arrives to a point where he's feeling desperate inside, thinking about facing everything he thinks he's going to find there. So he decides to get off the bus and return. But when he tries to get off the bus, what happens is the bus is going around a traffic circle, and the top of the bus starts to move from side to side. And he recalls a story in the Bible of Jonah, who was being shaken because he didn't want to go to the destination God had called him to. So he gets off the bus, planning to go back home on another bus, but then he feels a strong conviction, I have to go. So he takes another bus in the same direction, and finally he arrives to this place called Garbage City. Let's talk a little bit about the details of that city. How was it? The city was full of trash, because the trash was collected from all over Cairo. The garbage piled up, and there was no place for it. So they put it in big bags, and then there wasn't enough place for that on top of the houses that they had, which were pieces of metal and other types of materials from the garbage that they built their homes with. So they really didn't have established houses, and there was trash and dirty water everywhere. There was desperate people who were suffering from different types of diseases. Even the first time, he remembers that he wanted to see where they lived. Some people were in types of tents, and inside were pigs. And he had been raised in the field. He knew some of the smells, but nothing prepared him for what he saw in that place. So everything in him resisted everything he saw and felt. Dangerous people would go to that place to hide from the police, and the police couldn't go there for any reason. So it was a situation of total despair. And this man reaches that place, and how does he settle down there? Because one thing is to have connected with the garbage collector and say, I'll go with you, or maybe I'll go for a little while and see, but that's not the case. Right, that wasn't the case. He keeps looking around and getting to know the place a little, and he says, I can't help in any way. I'm sorry, but this is too much. I can't. This has overwhelmed me from the beginning. It would overwhelm anyone. Right. He just feels that it goes beyond him. He didn't think it would be possible to overcome the situation there. So he resisted. He said, I can't help at all, but Kitty's insisted. Come, give it a chance. We're going to try. So he was looking around, and suddenly, after looking down for so long, he looks up. And when he looks up, he sees the landscape. The landscape beyond Garbage City. He notices how spectacular it is. These mountains, those hills, and he thinks perhaps the help doesn't come from looking down but from looking up. So he answers at that moment for the third time, I can't help you in any way. But this time he adds, except to pray. So here's this little expectation of a potential that if he prays, something might happen. And what happens? Well, he says, I'm going to look up, around there. And when he went up the mountain, he found a cave, one of those days when he visited. While looking around, he found this cave on the mountain that can be seen today on the internet. You can see what happened there. But it was a cave where monks in the 5th century went to pray. So he stood there thinking it would be good to come to this place to pray. And something happened to him there, a kind of miracle, something supernatural. Yes, he says, we're going to pray 3 Sundays in a row, in the evenings, with another person who you send from the community. And after that, we're going to see what happens. So they get to the 3rd Sunday, and they go to pray. And in that prayer, something supernatural happens. A windstorm, right? You've studied well, a windstorm. So this strong wind blows up like a windstorm. And that day he had a friend from the city there with him, from Garbage City. Next to him they're praying. And suddenly, when the winds come, and they're dying down, and this is the miracle, you have to have a little faith to believe it, but this is what's written and documented everywhere, that as the winds die down, right on the stone where he's kneeled praying, a little page floats down, along with all the rest of the dirt and things that were being blown around, and the page was from the Bible, from Acts 18, verses 9 and 10. And what does it say? It says, "Do not fear." I'm going to say it more or less by heart, by memory, the concept. But it says, "Don't be afraid, because I'm with you," says the Lord. And he says, "Don't worry." And why? Because God says, "I have many people in that place." And that's the phrase. When God says he has a lot of people in that place, that was the phrase that took root in his heart. So instead of continuing to say, "No, no, no," he finally says, "Yes." So I assume two things. When we resist a call that God sends us, which makes us uncomfortable, perhaps because it's not what we would do, even vocationally, but finally, supernatural things need to happen so that we have to accept. People who are watching this documentary, maybe they're experiencing this with a person in their neighborhood, in their city, where they see abandoned children, where they see situations of tragedy and pain. And we all end up, sometimes even watching the news, as a spectator. We feel aware, but we don't go into action. So when we see this story and meet this person, and I want to ask you this because you met him, what characteristics would make someone break out of that inaction to finally carry them to obedience and to the yes effect? I'm going to do it. It makes me feel uncomfortable, but I'll do it. To be able to say that, what are the virtues that he has to have to be able to understand that he has to resist his own nature and do what God is calling him to do? A significant project. I think the most important of all the virtues is a sensitivity to know that this comes from God and not from man. Because God speaks and men speak. And when men speak, then you answer to current needs, as you've mentioned in a number of cases. But if you feel in your heart that this is difficult, it's complicated, it's beyond my abilities to do something that will help, but if suddenly, if you say, like in this case, I don't have a human solution, but maybe God has a solution for me. And that was the step that he took, to say, in my flesh, I can't do anything, but I need to seek God and see what he says. I understand that in that place, he establishes a church, finally, in that cave. But he not only does an evangelistic work, a diffusion of Christianity, but he also starts a business venture, recycling trash. And today it's a model. Tell me a little about that. Yes, the church is a miracle because Mokattam, or Garbage City, above this city was a mountain of stone, just a large stone, and they begin to carve it out. And little by little, they make a cave. Because there was a small cave, but they want to make a big cave for a church. And they end up making a cave that we can see and visit, one of the most famous places, as it's the largest church in all of the Middle East today. So what happened in his case was that he didn't just think about the spiritual needs, but rather he began to face the other realities in terms of all the disaster in the community, regarding diseases, the trash, the dirty water, all that was everywhere, the animals as well. And they didn't have a good place to stay at night either. They didn't have formally established houses. And all that trash was just there, on top of everyone. And it affected people's health. So he began with a call, in earnest, to respond to the real needs of this group. So he began to act, and a miracle perhaps bigger than any that we've seen in the world. It's one of the biggest, what's happened in Garbage City. In other words, it was no longer a city of garbage. What they did is produce a transformation. They recycled the trash, they sell it today. There are very important companies such as Pantene and others. 176 companies. I mean that small companies arise in that city and sell back to big companies like those, and they begin to establish the foundations for housing. Houses now much more formally established, and a beautiful community that you can see the contrast of what's new and what's from the past, and each time the development of the city moves forward and becomes much more established. And they recycle 80% of the trash they collect, even more than in the United States. One enters with that, but comes out with 40 or 50% of what you can receive and not recycle. It's a global model. Yes, it's a global model, including in Sinai, which is famous there in the south of Israel. It's a place that imitated Garbage City. They have the same model for collecting trash, and so now they're teachers for other places in the world that have this situation and that arise in very needy places. How did you meet him? Well, I met him in 2014 in France, in Macon, France. We had a summit with people like him from different parts of the world who come from all over the world with stories to tell realities of transformation. They begin with themselves, and after that, the communities around them. And he was there, and we met. And I invited him to share his story. He shared in front of everyone, and he was there in front, just like we are, one-on-one, like we're sitting. And I'll never forget when he discovered that little paper within all the garbage, and it was a text from the Bible. That was what moved him, and it moved us. We were all very motivated from all over the world to see that example and see if it can be done in that place with that person who's limited in so many ways. We can also answer and do what we can with what we have. Knowing him as a person, what do you think is an attribute that you could say is an attribute of his that's worthy to imitate? A singular characteristic that he has, something very specific that's worthy to imitate. I think it would be commitment. He's a person of commitment. When he made that commitment, by nature, he resolved to fulfill the dream that he had. At first it was a dream, but to the degree that he committed to respond to the needs, and to the degree that he responded and worked and fulfilled his dream, I believe that commitment doesn't usually come humanly when we first see the need. It's almost something that has to be born supernaturally. And of course, in his case, it was supernatural. Because to journey down the road of commitment, it's not an emotional road. Because in the end, if I'm moved by my emotions, when things are going well, I'll be very committed. But when things are going badly, there is when I believe commitment is really measured. It's a very interesting virtue, because that's what allowed him to finally see the result of something that at the beginning he said, I want to run. I can't help here because I don't know what to do with the trash. It was very human in the sense that he had many excuses, right? One of the excuses may be that I'm limited physically. I have so many excuses, and the needs are great. I have my own limitations. I'm not prepared for this. How many excuses can I have? But in spite of all this, I'll take the first step. And as he took the first step, the second step came. And then a person from inside the community, Kiddies. And then a small community that started to answer. Then there was a spiritual community. This church meets on Thursdays. Thousands and thousands of people now are seeking God with many different backgrounds. It's not easy today to represent that group. They're very persecuted. as a group within Egypt. So it's not easy. He has to deal with many different challenges in society itself. One of his co-workers, also called Saman, because Saman is the Christian surname, so he has a different first name. In the case of Saman, I'm forgetting his name at this moment, but there was another who died, who was a Saman, 2 or 3 months ago, but he died in a terrible way in the streets. So they're being persecuted for being Christians within that area. So there's persecution, there's also lack of support for all that he's doing, but in spite of that, 176 companies are recycling, and they're a model for the rest of the world. To close this story, in the book, something that grabbed my attention was a statement by the garbage collector who says, "No work is shameful. What's shameful is sitting at home and living off of someone else, or begging for alms, or stealing." The garbage collector mentioned a text from the Bible where it says, "If you work hard, you'll always have bread." And that's what the garbage collector said. It's a very good lesson to end this stage of reflection about the life of this man, Father Saman. Yes, it is. Interesting story. We've seen here a story of transformation that touches everyone, because we all have a garbage city. Maybe we don't see it physically, but we see people's pain and tragedy. And God's telling us, well, maybe we're resisting like Father Saman, but finally he leads to the yes effect. I'm willing to give my skills, my talents, my abilities to help these people and produce a relevant transformation story. The yes effect. Stories that transform lives.